Good evening. I would like to call our special council meeting on Monday, April 3rd to order at 6 p.m. Hello to colleagues on council and members of staff, and to members of the public here in the chamber, and to those who may be watching a live web stream of our meeting this evening. Our special council meeting is being held to complete the business that was brought forward at our council meeting last week. And just a note that we will continue our regular schedule and have a regular council meeting on Tuesday, April the 11th. I would like to acknowledge with respect that we're holding our meeting this evening in the traditional and ancestral lands of the Wasanich Nations, and we express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia. Before seeking a motion to approve the agenda, we have one additional piece of correspondence that was received today after the agenda was published last week, and that is a letter from Liz Parker that will go under item 13A. I would seek a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. The motion carries. And so we are continuing the business from last week, and we will begin with item 6B. And I'm just turning to that in the agenda. That's Development Variance Permit Application number DV100331 at 10273 Cleveland Road. Council, I have, as in past meetings, recused myself from this item. I am a resident that lives across the street from the proponent, and I'll now recuse myself and turn the meeting over to Councillor Novick, who is acting mayor for the month of month of April.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this development variance permit number DV100331 to reduce the required front setback and exterior side setback to allow the construction of an addition onto the existing single-family dwelling. The recommendation from staff is that the DV be approved. May I have a motion for this?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Motivation? None. All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We can ask the mayor to come back.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. We'll continue with the next item, which is the
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Sorry if I may. Just on our agenda, we have listed a public participation, and I'm wondering if we should have one, or do you want to bypass that?
I'm sorry, I'm looking to the agenda before.
Yeah, it's placed
before
underneath
that.
it. Yeah.
So, thank you for that, Councillor Garnett. So I will open our public participation period, where members of the public have an opportunity to come and speak to council on any item. Sorry, this evening would be any item on the agenda, because this is a special council meeting. So, members of the public have 3 minutes to speak to council. I will call for a first time if anyone's wishing to address council. Please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening. David Calverley. I am still a resident of Sydney. Item on the agenda this evening for the plan to develop the zoning bylaw. And I just wanted to comment, this is an exceptional plan. I think it reflects the professionalism that staff, carried through the OCP process. I was very pleased to be part of that OCP process. I think it's a great plan. I like the timing, etc. I like the ideas in it. I will comment that today, of course, the province threw a bit of a ringer at everything. How much that becomes an actual problem, we don't know. One could anticipate that the legislation, as they say, is not coming down until the fall. We won't know the details until the beginning of next year. It's rather like, Donald Trump's indictment. We all know what it's about, but it's a lot of hot air at the moment until we see the details. With that in mind, I'm sure that when staff introduce, there'll be talking about the timing that they've suggested for the, it's going to take a bit longer perhaps. My only comment, and where I would look to council to perhaps provide a bit of extra direction, is that some people are going to be concerned about this. They're going to read into it, oh boy, you know, we've got rid of single family zoning, we're going to have housing everywhere, we're going to have, you know, and the counter to that is public engagement. And so I would encourage council to perhaps give a little direction to staff that some more public engagement perhaps at each step, not just through APC, but direct public engagement rather than wait until the end and have a big show might be a good thing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Coslin. I'll call for a second time if anyone's wishing to address council this evening. And for a third and final time, anyone wishing to come forward? Seeing none, I'll close public participation. And just before we go to the next item, I'll turn to Mr. Beck. Thank you for coming to council this evening. I understand the item has been handled on our agenda, and so you're welcome to stay to our agenda, but you're also welcome to leave.
Thank you, Council. I may say I found all my dealings with the staff very competent, very professional, and very willing to explain any of the complexities that were involved. It's very good. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Good evening. And so we will continue with adoption of minutes from our regular council meeting of March 13th. I seek a mover that they be approved.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries. And we'll now turn, I have nothing under Mayor's report this evening. I'll turn to item 11A, which is a verbal report from our liaison, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a report for the Sydney Museum and Archives Society. Attended the latest board meeting on March 18th. Visitor attendance was very good for the first 2 months of 2023 with 5,324 visitors welcomed. Financially, the museum remains in a solid financial position with the combined visitor donations for January and February being around $17,787. It far exceeded their budget, which was for $9,750. And if you might recollect, their budget for all of 2022 was $25,000. So, to say the least, Lego has been really popular, and particularly, I'll get into this now, the Lego exhibit, which they extended and actually ended on April the 2nd. They coincided with all the sort of spring breaks that were kind of overlapping each other. It was very successful. And just as an example, on Family Day, they had over 950 visitors on one day. And I actually made the trip into town and was going to go and see how it was going. And no, I can't get in because there was a lineup from the door up the stairs all the way to 4th Street. And that was only because of fire code. They couldn't let any more people in the building. And also in the back where the master Lego, Mr. Sather was doing the harvester for the Sydney Anacortes Ferry, he said that they were getting 12 to 15 people at a time in there. I'm not sure if it's still in there, but it was, the finished product was in the museum when I was in there last week. He will be taking it back because it is his Lego, but they are working on something to a smaller version that he'll put together for them that they can have on a permanent basis in the museum. So hopefully that'll take place coming soon. Now that excitement is all over, the next exhibit is going to be Snapshots, and that's scheduled to open April 10th. To date, there have been 81 submissions, and they're being reviewed for printing quality. And they've also reached out to the local business to see if they want to be a part of the exhibit by maybe providing a picture in their front window. We'll see how that goes. So far, they haven't had a huge uptake. As far as the Time and Memorial project, the waterfront signage project, the survey closed at the end of March, so they had over 100 responses. So thank you to everybody in the community that took part in that and provide input. It's much needed and much appreciated. The second last thing I'm going to talk about is their staffing. There have been some impacts to staffing at the museum. Both the assistant director and education and outreach coordinator have resigned. The latter position has been renamed the volunteer outreach and outreach coordinator, and the duties have been changed somewhat. So far they've had, they're currently advertising, but they've had multiple applicants for both positions, and they're currently interviewing for both as well as their summer student positions. So hopefully they'll have some good news there in the not too far horizon. But ultimately, due to these staffing issues, the exhibit, which was scheduled for later this year, Wine, Ciders, and Beers, Oh My, has been postponed to 2024. And just as a reminder, lastly, the City Museum and Archives Society AGM, for those who are wishing to attend, will be held on April 15th at 10 a.m. in the Arboretus Room downstairs here in Town Hall. And the entrance will be through the bottom door by the back parking lot. And that's it for my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to seek a mover for a motion to receive for information.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you again, Councillor Garnett. We'll next turn to committee reports, and the first is our Committee of the Whole meeting on March 20th. Councillor Duck was chair of that meeting, and I'll turn to Mr. Duck, or Councillor Duck, with regards to the moving the minutes and the recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the minutes be received of the March 20th Committee of the Whole meeting, 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
Arising out of the discussion of this meeting were 3 recommendations, and I'd like to move through each of them with direction from council on that. So the first recommendation is Development Permit Application number DP 100837 and Development Variance Permit Application number DV 100322 at 9824 5th Street to relax the vehicle parking and commercial loading space requirements in order to develop additional commercial space within the building of 9824 5th Street. And I'd like to move the recommendation forward to be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries.
Second arising motion was the consideration of the 2023 grants and aid, and I'd like to move the following, that the following 2023 grants and aid requests be approved. Saanich Peninsula Pipe Band, $1,000. Sydney Lawn Bowling, $1,000. BC Aviation Museum, $3,000. Cycling Without Age Society, $1,500. Sydney Guide and Scout Hall Society, $1,000. Navy League of Canada, $1,500. Peninsula Dry Grad Society, $1,000. FED Urban Agricultural Society, $500. 676 Kitty Hawk Sponsoring Committee Society, $1,000. Need to Suicide Prevention Education and Support, $3,000. Capital Bike, $1,000. Friends of St. Andrews, $2,000. And Mount Newton Center Society, $1,000 for a total of $18,500.
I'll second that.
We have that moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
And finally, recommendation 3, that the following 2023 grants and aid requests be denied. And the ones that are listed are United Way, the Arts Reach Society, Sydney Preschool, Ocean Ambassadors Canada, Peninsula Players, Beacon Community Services, Take a Hike Foundation, and finally the Capital Regional Food and Agricultural Initiatives.
I'll second that as well.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Duck. We'll now turn to item 13A under staff reports. That's the request for removal of boulevard trees at 2305 Malaview Avenue. We do have a report from staff, and I would turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. This report provides council with some background information on a request to remove 3 boulevard trees at 2305 Malaview Avenue. The applicant also came forward during the December 19th, 2022 council meeting, requesting the removal of 6 boulevard trees. At that time, council expressed a willingness to consider a modified application from the property owner. The tree preservation bylaw does not currently support the removal of these trees, so staff's recommendation is to deny it. However, I'm here to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. A question through you to staff, just for some clarity. So my understanding is that tree M1 is close to the neighbor's property, but we're uncertain whether it's on their property or on, it seems like it's close to the town boulevard. So my question regarding that is, if council were to approve those trees coming down, would I be correct in assuming that staff would go through some sort of process, a survey or whatever, to ensure whose property the tree is on and then proceed accordingly?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, we don't typically remove boulevard trees if a neighboring property was not supportive of the removal and there was no reason to remove the tree, like if it was not a hazard. So we would recommend that approval be received from that property owner before removing M1. We haven't been in this sort of situation where we're talking about, there's a potential that this is a shared tree. We haven't had a formal survey done to confirm that. But if it is a shared tree, that property owner does have some rights over that tree. So we would need some advice if that was the direction you wanted to move forward in.
Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily need direction from council on what to do next. If council chose to approve the tree coming down, we would just leave it at that, and then staff, you don't need direction from us to do anything further?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, it would be helpful if there was some direction, if that approval be granted from that property owner prior to the removal. It would just be helpful to have that in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Are there any questions? I will turn to colleagues for a recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe?
So I'll make a motion that the removal of trees M1, M2, and M3 be approved on the condition that approval from the owner of 2307 Malaview is received, and that a building permit for a secondary suite is approved.
I'll second it.
Second, I'm going to turn to staff. Ms. Clary?
Sorry, just the way that reads, it sounds like the approval from 2307 would be required for all 3 trees, where it probably wouldn't be required except for M1.
Yes, thank you. So I'll clarify my motion, that approval from owner of 2307 Malaview is received for M1.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Sure.
Point of information, just clarification within that motion that these are M1, M2, and M3 are at 2305 Malaview. So just be clear that that's where those trees are.
Yeah.
Okay. Do staff feel they've captured the motion, Ms. Nelson? Thank you. Moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover.
It's never a good thing when we have to take down trees, and especially boulevard trees. We heard from a member of the public last week about concerns about that. On the other hand, we are seeing a number of trees that are starting to cause damage to drain system, other things like that. And this is a case where the homeowners are also wanting to provide a secondary suite. So we have to balance, the need with housing for the need with trees. So in this case, I'm okay with it, based on the information received about, damage and the fact that they want to, it's a town requirement to have a wider driveway to accommodate a secondary suite. So I'm okay with them coming down for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder.
Not at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I just had a question and clarification to staff. I know the proponent has asked for the widening of the driveway. Were any of those trees also requested specifically, I'm thinking, because of the threat to their new drainage system that they just put in? Or this was only the driveway?
Okay, I'm going to ask council for a motion to invite the proponent to speak.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Please come forward. If you could just provide your name.
Yeah, my name is Sean McIntyre. I live at 2305 Malaview. M2 and M3 caused the severing of my perimeter drain lateral going out, tying into the city, and that was part of the reason why we were getting so much flooding into our crawl space.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, you still have the floor.
Oh, I'm in favor of this motion, though I would have gone further and said that M1 would be conditional upon, if required, the approval from the residents of 2307, and the driveway, yeah, but the M2 and M3, I don't need the approval for the building permit, because it sounds like these trees were requested due to facilities that are already on site regardless of their building permit. And I don't know, I know how expensive drainage is. I actually can't get a quote from a contractor. They say they won't insult me, and it would be cheaper to tear down my house and actually build a new one. So I'm very sympathetic to making sure that they don't lose their drainage again if those two trees are the problem.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I have a question through to staff, and that is, if the permit for the secondary suite was not approved, then the removal would not be permitted. Tree removal would not be permitted of those two trees. Is that the correct understanding from the wording of the motion?
That is my understanding of the wording.
Okay, so I think Councillor Duncan has made a point there, and I'll leave it for Council, but Ms. Clary, you did want to comment?
I did just want to clarify that the town did replace the lateral already, and so we did it by hydrovac, and although roots can continue to grow and heave, it is currently in good condition.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. And I was going to speak to that, so thank you for bringing that up. As the gentleman spoke to earlier, at the March 27th meeting, they've fixed their perimeter drains, and town staff has fixed the problem from our end as well. So for me, I think the whole, and the trees from the report of the arborist, the Douglas fir is the largest, healthiest tree, and I believe the other one, they can be remedied, and the M3 is largely free of defects, and there can be some remedies applied to that as well. For me, the issue, I think it comes down to the driveway, the expansion of the driveway and the secondary suite, and two points that have already been raised from a different perspective. Staff has advised from a question that if a building permit is issued and the trees are subsequently removed, that building permit can lapse in 6 months and nothing ever has to happen. So there's no guarantee that a building, not saying that the person wouldn't follow through, but there is the possibility that the building may never happen and the trees are gone. And also, as far as the secondary suite, I mean, we got an email speaking to affordable housing in the community, and although I appreciate that, there's no guarantee that in the end it can be and will be affordable. So I hesitate on that side as well. For me, I've done a lot of reading of our urban forest strategy, and as it ties to the OCP, and particularly 12.3.9, which says to enhance and conserve the town's urban forest and tree canopy, and 12.3.10, implement the urban forest strategy to achieve a tree density target that equates to 18% tree canopy coverage. Now that was for 2040, zero net loss by 2030. And the urban forest strategy speaks a lot about the fact that we're going to lose trees to development. And one of the ways we can help to stop that is to maintain and enhance our boulevard trees, which the speaker the previous week spoke to. And so I'm really reticent to approve removal of town-owned trees, and I actually look at them as town-owned assets because they are such a critical benefit to our community. So I'm really hesitant to approve removing our boulevard trees, given that our strategy is saying that how very, very important they are. This is difficult. Like, I understand the decision about talking about affordable housing and community and secondary suites, and the province spoke to that today about providing options to allow for more secondary suites. But I also have to think in terms of the context of not just this home and not just that neighborhood, but our whole community. And I'm very worried the direction we're going, very worried about how many trees we're losing, and it's for multiple reasons. Climate change is killing trees. Certain species aren't surviving. Some are growing older and to the point where they can't survive anymore. And if the more of the protected trees that can still survive, and our town staff says they can, says that utility's not an issue. I'm just reading from the report itself. They're not an imminent hazard, which is an important part of our bylaw. I'm worried about where this is going to lead us in the future, because this could be the start of many of these kind of applications. And where does that lead some of our communities? Some of our areas and neighborhoods could have no trees, because we can plant trees somewhere else, but we have to find those spaces to plant them. And we may find we don't have spaces in these neighborhoods to plant these trees in replacement fashion. And so what do we have neighborhoods without trees? And how is that gonna impact people? And how is that gonna, in terms of heat and everything else that goes with it, stormwater mitigation, all of it. So I'm trying to be, not specific to this because we have to vote on this, but in the context of this, in the larger community, I have real problems with making a decision like this and removing these trees. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I equally sit on the fence with this because it's the challenge of the homeowner wanting to try and provide accommodation within his residence, but as well as, you know, what we're doing in the city or the town relative to tree coverage. Is there a compromise in this? Like right now, we're advocating for, or the motion on the floor is to, you know, remove the 3 boulevard trees, M1, M2, and M3. Is it necessary that they all have to go? Or is there a compromise in here where we only need to move 1 of them or 2 of them and leave something there that sort of bridges the gap between what we're doing? Question through you to staff.
Well, Councillor, I think it's with council to make a recommendation with regards to the denial or approval of removal of trees, and also which trees. So if you wish to make an amendment to the motion on the removal of all 3 trees, that's certainly within your purview.
That's why I'm asking the question, because I don't have that answer, whether, you know, it can be done by taking out, you know, part of it's the driveway, part of it's the additional accommodation. And so M1 is under discussion with 2307, but M2 and M3, is there a requirement? And that's why I'm not understanding what we can and can't do here.
So is your question, sorry, I'm just trying to clarify, if your question is through to staff, whether the addition can proceed without the removal of tree 2 and 3?
Correct.
I will forward that, or direct that to staff.
Through to Councillor Deck, they would need to provide parking on site for their secondary suite, and although I'm not intimately familiar with the site, I believe they would have to remove at least 1 tree to widen the driveway to accommodate that parking. So I think if it were to come time, although I haven't seen the building permit plans or anything, it would be challenging not to remove any trees while still providing that.
Councillor Duck, you still have the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thanks to Councillor Duck for that question. In my mind, however, you know, given the third-party arborist recommendations were to remove, you know, 6 boulevard trees and the application is for 3, I feel like the applicant themselves has put that question into context for their plans around the secondary suite, as well as the requirement to expand the driveway. And also that report notes the damage that has been done to the neighboring driveway, in particular by one of the trees. So I like the motion that's here in the sense that it has that provision around moving forward with the suite, as I think that is you know, the trade-off here, knowing that the applicant has also indicated their commitment to replant trees. So at this point, I plan to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I was just going to Councillor Duck's point. My understanding from the staff report is it indicates that M1, 2, and 3 all were required to come down for the construction of the driveway, is my understanding. And then just reiterate Councillor Rintoul's point that I think in terms of compromise, that originally this had come forward with 6 trees, and they've pared it down to 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I had one other thing written and I forgot.
Certainly.
The word compromise. And it struck me because there's 2 ways of looking at compromise. And I thought to myself, I wonder if the trees in question think it's a good compromise. But then I thought of the other way of looking at compromise, and I think by doing this, we compromise our goals in the OCP, and the UFS, and actually the overall future health of our community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll speak briefly. I'm in support of the motion as put forward, and I certainly appreciate, as all of us, I think, at one time or another have expressed concerns with regards to our urban forest strategy, our tree canopy. We've strengthened during the previous term, the tree preservation law was strengthened significantly, and while we can enumerate the various causes for loss of trees, at the same time there is a very concerted effort on the part of staff for not only planting replacement trees but planting new trees in our community. And so there is a balance, but I do appreciate the comments from colleagues. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Have a good evening. We'll next turn to item 13B, the Ironman 70.3 Victoria Triathlon event, and we have a recommendation. If council did have any questions, we could ask them now, or we could ask them after the motion is moved. Councillor Dutt?
I'll make the motion if you want to move that forward.
Please, yeah.
And it's so recommended that the Ironman Canada Inc. be granted permission to run the cycling portion of their triathlon through Sydney on Sunday, May 28th, 2023, subject to the following conditions. 1, that Ironman Canada provide the town with proof of $5 million liability insurance, naming the town of Sydney as a third-party insured for this event. 2, that Ironman Canada submit a traffic management plan 4 weeks prior to the event that is to the satisfaction of the town staff and the RCMP. 3, that Ironman Canada send notices to affected residents and businesses advising of the event and provide a contact number should there be any concerns or questions. 4, that Ironman Canada fund a fire department crew to be on call at the fire hall between 7 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. And 5, that no costs are to be incurred by the town in relation to this event.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, no, I note that staff said there was no issues last year, although I think I brought up the same point last year, and I still think it's odd that when we hear so much about speeding cars in our community that we're allowing cyclists to exceed the speed limit in our 30-kilometer-an-hour zones. Just a point of reference. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we'll now turn to item 13C, which is the Taking It to the Street road hockey event, and we have a recommendation.
And also move that Help Fill a Dream's use of amplification during the June 17th, 2023 Taking to the Streets road hockey event at Iroquois Park be approved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're now turning to item 13D, which is a proposed approach updating the town's zoning bylaw. And I'll turn to staff for an introduction. Good evening, Mr. Newcomb.
Good evening, thank you. I have a short presentation here, so I'll just share my screen. Is that showing up okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So this is just introducing the staff report on the agenda for the proposed approach to the update to the town zoning bylaw. So a quick overview of this, the background to this project. The town zoning bylaw was adopted in June 2012, so it's a bit over a decade old. It's been amended several times, quite a few times actually, in the decade since it's been adopted. But generally, those amendments were specific amendments to address specific issues, but the overall function of the bylaw itself, staff believe is still quite good. This is a priority project in Council's 2023 strategic plan, so we're moving forward with it quickly here. And the intent of the project is to give a general review and update to the bylaw, and also to incorporate new policy from the recent OCP update that the town completed last year, and any other recent policy changes that the town has adopted recently as well. So the OCP update project did provide a bit of a shift in some policy directions for the town around a number of areas. And so this is the best opportunity to incorporate those into the zoning bylaw update. And we'd also be looking to some recent developments in town to see sort of how those worked vis-a-vis the zoning bylaw, and as well looking at best practices around zoning bylaws and what some other municipalities have done, and look to improve the bylaw overall. So a bit about zoning bylaws generally. They are enabled by the Local Government Act, and they allow local governments to divide communities into zones. And those zones can regulate the use and density of land and buildings, the siting, size, dimensions of buildings and uses, the locations of uses on land and within buildings, and the shape and dimensions of parcels of land. Traditionally, zones were very distinct, and the intent was sort of to divide up uses into very single-use specific zones. But more recently, most municipalities are trying to promote a higher level of activity and vibrancy in their communities by adopting quite a few different uses into single zones and creating more mixed-use zones. The overall sort of idea behind zoning bylaws, though, to separate incompatible uses is still very much something that we pursue. So a quick overview of some guiding project principles. As I said, we'd like to reflect key elements of the new OCP and other policy directions that the town has adopted recently. We're looking to incorporate sound planning principles into the bylaw, and as well current best practices with regard to zoning bylaws. Make the zoning bylaw as clear and consistent as possible in terms of its structure and formatting. Implement the policy objectives in a simple and concise way so that they're easily understood by the community, and make the bylaw itself generally user-friendly for pretty much everyone who might have a chance to open it. So looking to the mechanism of carrying out the project, staff are looking to do this in-house. So mainly having planning staff working on the nuts and bolts of the project, looking to some other departments for assistance where needed, and only looking to the outside in terms of consulting assistance on a very limited basis. We are looking to maintain the general structure of the current zoning bylaw and just update it as it stands. And we would go through each section of the bylaw, giving it a very comprehensive review, not necessarily updating it. We wouldn't be looking to change what isn't broken, but looking to update it so that each section gets a fulsome review and updated where necessary, and incorporating that new OCP policy as needed. The idea would be, as we complete major sections of the review, we would bring those forward to council to provide a good overview of that section, how it functions, what some of the options might be in terms of policy, and give council a chance to really weigh in on those specific areas of each section of the bylaw, as well as the focus area topics, which I'll talk about in a second here. The estimated timeline, we're looking at 12 to 18 months, but that heavily depends on the level of community engagement. What we did find in the OCP update project was that referrals to committees, back and forth to council, it does take a significant amount of time. So we'd be looking to provide some recommendations around council about how that could be accomplished fairly efficiently. And just looking at some of the focus areas that came out of the OCP that we'd be looking to bring forward to council, some in a more general way, some in a very specific way. Climate action, that would be, I think, a more general approach to the bylaw overall. The environment, we'd be looking at some specific sections and how we could improve the zoning bylaws function around protecting the natural environment. Housing would be something that we would definitely come forward to council as a very specific focus topic with a lot of policy options for council to consider. Number 4, there's an outstanding council resolution regarding the R4 zone as it relates to Summergate Village. So we would be dealing with that as part of this project as well. For the residential areas, we'd be reviewing the density levels to make sure that those density levels in the zoning bylaw are consistent with the new policy in the OCP. And the OCP also articulated the need for several new zones. So we'd be looking at bringing those new zones forward for council's review as well. Just maybe one comment on the provincial announcement today. It certainly has some significant implications for this project. However, I think given the lack of detail that was released today, I don't think it's a good time to comment at this time in terms of where it might take the project. I think it would be good to see some draft legislation come out and then approach it, bring it back to council at that time if there are significant implications for the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues if there are questions. Councillor Novick.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Newcomb. So does that mean that you're going to proceed with the development of the zoning bylaws as though the legislation wasn't there, and then you will go back after the fact and make revisions if necessary? Is that your plan?
Through the mayor to Councillor Novick, essentially, yes. I think that would be the best course of action. What Premier Eby announced today has, I think, some significant potential implications. As our OCP and zoning bylaw are currently structured, for one part of the announcement you probably heard was that duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes be permitted in single family areas. So for that to happen in Sydney, we would either need to amend the OCP under current legislation to allow that to happen via the zoning bylaw, or I suppose the province may change the legislation to allow that to happen directly via the zoning bylaw or some other mechanism. There is no detail on what that mechanism might be at this point, so everything is speculation. And typically what happens is when provincial legislation comes out, we respond to it. We try to respond to it in as timely a fashion as possible. And I think that's the same approach that staff would recommend taking here. We don't know any details, and I think we should continue on with the business of reforming the zoning bylaw as proposed. And if something does come out of the province's announcement today that has implications, we will certainly bring forward some options for council to consider at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb, for your short but brief presentation and for being here this evening. So my question is, we've had two different speakers speak to this, well, both last week and this week at public participation. So just for my state of mind with regards to community engagement, and I understand the extra cost and time it's conceptualized within that. But would it be under council's purview that during the process, if we felt there was a section or a part that we're discussing, that if we could direct staff to carry out some community engagement if we felt it was necessary, without having it be in this particular recommendation tonight?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, yes, that's the idea, that as these sections come forward, if council feels that there's something in there that would benefit from a more significant community engagement, that's an option you could certainly take. Obviously, we haven't had a chance to develop any new zoning regulations at this point, and so it's very difficult to say, what those might be. However, I think if you look at the engagement that was done during the OCP, it's very high level, it's very thematic. The community provided a lot of input, and that was adopted into the OCP. Provincial legislation says that the zoning bylaw for the town must be consistent with the OCP. So that whatever is adopted into the zoning bylaw is going to be along those same thematic lines. And really it comes down to council's interpretation of, does this zoning regulation that's being proposed meet what the sort of theme of the OCP is? So when that regulation comes forward, council will have an opportunity to say, yes, we think you nailed it, or maybe it's better to hear what the community has to say about this. And the zoning bylaws is full of so many different types of regulations that really at this point it's very difficult to say, yes, this here would need community engagement, this would not, or there's just so much detail that council will need to consider whether to what degree it needs engagement on, that I think it's premature to say exactly what an engagement plan might look like. And so this is why staff are proposing this a little more segmented approach where council can sort of dig into the options and weigh what you'd like to hear from the community on.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Newcomb. Yeah, it's very important undertaking. I'm pleased to see that it's being addressed expeditiously, and I say that I recognize the timeline, 12 to 18 months, is not perhaps viewed by some as expeditious, but it's a very important undertaking, and so I'm pleased that it's a priority in the front end of our term. You made note specifically of Summergate and the R4 zone there, and drew attention to it. Should we expect that perhaps there are other areas of Sydney that may have some sort of zoning that is currently out of alignment with neighboring properties that would be intentionally addressed as part of this process as well?
Thanks for the question. I think through the Mayor to Councillor Rintoul, I think to a lesser degree, and it's again one of those things where unlike Summergate Village, where we know that the land use contract will expire in June of 2024, and the R4 zone that's already in the zoning bylaw will take over from that land use contract and come into play. With other properties, the OCP land use designation may have changed. That may or may not necessitate a change in the zoning. That's something we haven't even looked at this point in the project. So there's simply not the Summergate Village issue is, I think, a known quantity, whereas the other areas that may or may not change zones or have, different changes made to the regulation within that zone, those are not known quantities at this time. We need to go through, do a comprehensive and fulsome review of those other zones and bring that information forward to council as it comes up. In some areas, I think we might look at the zone and say it's functioning perfectly fine. Either very minor changes or no changes are necessary, or it may be the opposite. We simply don't have that information right now.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me the process provides the opportunity to address some of those fairly unique pockets and align them as may or may not be appropriate as we're going through this process. But from what I've heard, that comparison is certainly going to be made in the context of the OCP, and council with the opportunity to provide comment. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a question arising from that. Then I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe. Knowing as you've described, Mr. Newcomb, the Summergate transition from land use contract to zoning, and while we've indicated that this could be a 12 to 18-month process, do you anticipate that that Summergate zone rezoning will be one of the early sections to be pursued?
Yes, I think we'll try to deal with that one fairly early on.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. A question to Mr. Newcomb through yourself, Mr. Mayor, in regards to getting back to timing again, and knowing that it's hard to predict exactly how these this perhaps new legislation for the province will impact. But knowing that residential housing is particularly an issue for us, might there be any capacity for us to focus in on those aspects of the zoning bylaw that relate to residential housing first, and then get to, the other areas, commercial areas and that sort of thing, just so that we're in a position to take advantage of any funding that might come forth from senior levels of government that require certain types of zoning. So, yeah, thanks.
through the mayor to Councillor Keefe. You know, I would actually say that Sydney is already very well positioned to respond to any applications that come in from a housing standpoint. Sydney's, in the current zoning bylaw, taken a very, I think, progressive approach to trying to address the housing crisis. We still have a fairly significant amount of zoned land that could accommodate development applications tomorrow. Certainly, if a proponent came forward with any kind of affordable housing proposal or market rental or any kind of proposal, staff can bring that to council in a timely fashion and council can make a decision on that application. I think based on the changes that came out of the OCP, there will be some new zones and new areas of housing coming out of the zoning bylaw, at least proposed in the draft zoning bylaw. But even now, there is a fairly significant amount of land in Sydney that's available for housing development. And I would say I'm not overly concerned about not having housing options if a developer, a nonprofit developer, or anyone came forward looking to do a project. Sydney is already well positioned there.
Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. And one more. So in the announcement today, they talked about the provincial government about offering funding for secondary suites. And what I'm wondering is if that were to come into effect prior to our zoning bylaw, I believe our zoning bylaw is still going under the old BC building code. And my understanding is the newer building code after, I think, 2018 had some more relaxed provisions for secondary suites. So would we be, although our zoning bylaw hasn't been amended to the new BC building code, would we still apply those more relaxed requirements for secondary suites?
I mean, I will start off by saying that Sydney has for many, many years had one of the most permissive zoning bylaws with regard to secondary suites in the capital region. We still allow secondary suites in almost all of our zones, and that includes multifamily zones. For example, you can do a suite in a townhouse development, in an apartment building. The one change from 2018 that the zoning bylaw has not caught up to yet is that duplexes can now have secondary suites in them, I believe. That is not permitted by our zoning bylaw currently. It's definitely something we'll be looking at. Generally, though, I would say the breadth of secondary suites permitted in almost all of Sydney's residential zones, there are plenty of opportunities out there to do a suite. Even in the duplex zoned areas, while duplexes aren't permitted to have suites currently by the zoning bylaw, single family houses in those zones are allowed to have suites. So those same properties would certainly have an option to build a suite if that's something the owner wanted to do. And yes, the option for suites and duplex is something we're going to look at and bring forward. But that's the one thing that the zoning bylaw currently does not permit, that may in some limited cases be a lost opportunity for a property owner.
Councillor Keefe.
And just a follow-up on that. So I was thinking more about the more technical aspects, I think, that came out of the newer building code, I think. And I think that had to do with different sorts of workarounds, and also the amount of square footage that was permitted to be used. So don't need answer on all that stuff now, but I guess I was just making the point it would be maybe advantageous if we could be looking at what those technical requirements were, and if they're a bit more relaxed and would make it easier, that would be, I think, advantageous for us. Thanks.
Yeah, we certainly will be looking at all of those things.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. Further discussion, further questions? Further questions? I would look for council to consider the staff recommendation.
So I will so move. It's going to be a little change from this one then. I so move that council approve the proposed approach for the zoning bylaw review as outlined in this report dated March 27th, 2023, including the summary of guiding principles, proposed process and work plan, time frame for completion, proposed focused areas, and actual community engagement options, including utilization of the advisory planning committee to review and comment on selected key topics, and public presentations as directed by council.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second?
Okay, so I'm just going to seek clarification with staff. So I was following along there, and it was including the summary of guiding principles, proposed process and work plan, semicolon, time frame for completion, semicolon, proposed focus areas, and you were replacing the word potential with actual, or just removing potential?
I replaced it with actual.
Okay, I just question, is there a need for actual? If you don't have actual, then it means community engagement. I might turn to staff on that, if in terms of direction to staff, whether it's to just removal of the word potential or adding the word actual is of benefit to staff.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, what I heard was removal of potential and replacing with actual. Staff don't have an issue with that.
Okay, thank you. And then it continues, including utilization of the, sorry, I need you to repeat the part from the word including, Councillor Duck?
Sure, including utilization of the advisory planning committee to review and comment on selected key topics, and public presentations as directed by council.
Mr. Helm?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to, and I'm not sure if it needs some clarification in the proposed motion, but so there's two elements that I see as potentially being at odds. One is it acknowledges the time frame for completion in the staff report, 12 to 18 months. It's also noted in the staff report that that additional public presentations, engagement, etc., that 12 to 18 months is a best case scenario, and it could be extended. So as long as council's aware that there's the real potential of adding 6 months or more to the project is a possibility, depending on the levels of public presentations and engagement that may be deemed necessary. All of that takes time in terms of organizing, plus attaining the feedback and then reporting back to council and making any necessary changes. So I just wanted to point that out, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And sorry, I'm sorry to be repetitive, but Councillor Duck, could you just read the final wording that is added after selected key topics?
Yes, and public presentations as directed by council.
Thank you. So we have it moved, and the seconder was, sorry, the seconder was Councillor Duncan. So I'll turn to the mover and the seconder.
Yeah, so I added these slight changes to this motion based on Councillor Garnett's suggestions, that I think this is probably the most, and as was reflected in the last two public participations, this is a major piece of document that we need to make sure that people understand and show that the OCP actually has some substance to it. And the zoning bylaw is where this happens. I stood on this platform when I ran for election to this office, and I really think it's important that we communicate both to allow the community to reflect on it, but also to hear and understand what it means. And Mr. Newcomb indicated that there's some complexities to this, and there are major sections coming forward. And I think as each section comes forward and is presented to council, council may then suggest that it goes to public presentation, just to get that word out for understanding. This document will stand by our OCP for a number of years, and I think it's important that it does represent what the OCP is, and that the resident of Sydney understands what the elements of the bylaw, zoning bylaw, that support the OCP in their direction they've given to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I was comfortable with the motion put forward by staff, simply because I think I share some of the concerns Mr. Humble, expressed about changes to the timeline, and I know also just having this done was a big part of what we've promised to do, and I don't want to delay it unnecessarily. At this point, I think I would share probably the concerns staff, expressed in their report that the OCP was already the mechanism for public feedback, and we'll understand there are a number of members of public who are still very engaged and have, the skills and the background and the understanding of what a zoning bylaw is to give good feedback. I think for the majority of people, it's a complicated piece of technical legislation that they're not going to necessarily understand, and we may even get a volume of feedback, but I think that there's a very good chance a lot of it would be beside the point, something that would have been applicable to the OCP, or maybe not even something that has to do with land use at all. just knowing, I don't know, just having been involved in public feedback generally, and so I'm concerned about mistaking having more opportunities for public feedback with getting quality information out of the public. However, I'm comfortable with this new motion, because I think with the new provincial legislation coming out, there is now, I think, possibly a greater chance of needing to have that engagement on our end, even if it makes things longer, just to make sure that the public understands how this is interacting with what they just went through with the OCP, and this might be our only option to really make sure we get that done well. And secondarily, because as phrased, it says, as directed by council. And so if what we're hearing, if there's some impetus that's coming forward about a section of this bylaw that suggests that the public is bringing forward issues that really do need further discussion, and it is clear from what we hear in council from staff and our engagements with the public that would be productive, then it can go forward. And if it seems like something that it wouldn't be, and we can deal with it, in council right there without referring to it to the larger public, and we'll hear from interest groups and individuals who can really provide that information to us in other means, that mechanism is in there. So I'm supportive of this motion as it goes forward as a really good, I think, compromise in addressing my concerns and making sure that this turns out as well as it can. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor O'Toole, and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. I was happy with the staff recommendation because my understanding of it is that staff are going to bring things forward to us in bits, and that we'll be able to look at that, ask questions, and then at that point decide, okay, is this something that we need feedback on, and then we have the option to do that? Or is it something that's highly technical, and maybe the only people that need to look at it is the APC, or in some cases it might be the Accessibility Advisory Committee, depending whatever the issue is. So I was happy with that option. So I'm not sure, it's not clear to me what is different in what we're asking for here. Are we stating that in every case we have to go out for public engagement? So I'm needing a bit of clarity in terms of what's different in the amended motion.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as a question through the chair to Councillor Duck, who can answer if he wishes. Councillor Duck?
Thank you. I thought Councillor Duncan added to it quite significantly, because it is about that engagement, and I think she determined that by saying there will be some things that we do want to put out there, and as Councillor Garnett said, I think we've heard from public participation already, there's a need for that community engagement. It may not be on all of it, and what is ours to determine whether it's too technical is possibly what we need to inform the resident about and make sure they understand that. So it will be at our call to take it to the next step, and as Councillor Duncan ably pointed out, it will be that feedback we get from the residents on the specific aspect that comes forward that we need to say, hey, we need to step forward and give more information to that. And as I put in the motion, as directed by council, so it will be based on our thoughts to say, this, I think the residents need to hear more about this, and I think it's important to recognize that we don't determine how technical the information is. It comes to the public, and there will be feedback or there will not. And I think that will be help us make sure that we're getting the zoning bylaw right and making sure that it fits with what people understand and know and meets the needs of the OCP. The timeline, I don't think is as important as the document is that stands for a period of time. Our last OCP was, 17 years old? And not 17, yeah, I mean, that document needs that kind of substantial zoning bylaw behind it, and you even yourself pointed out the couple of the bylaws that haven't changed, such as secondary suites. So I think it's important that we do offer the opportunity for community engagement, both to give input on concerns they have, but also for clarification on information that's being presented to them and that we're selecting to pick.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor O'Keefe, you have the floor.
Yeah, so through you to Councillor Duck, I understand the point about wanting to get engagement, the value of it, all that sort of thing. What I'm trying to discern is, in wording the motion the way you have, what additional direction are we giving to staff that is different? Are we asking them to do something different than what is already contained in the motion? It's just funny, it's just, sorry, fuzzy to me in terms of what is the different expectation in your revised motion from what was recommended by staff?
I'll turn it to Councillor Duck.
So the substantial difference is there are now actual community engagement activities, not potential. So that's one difference. And the second is that if we see the need for public presentation on key factors, key elements, and we will direct staff to do it. So it's putting some substantial stand behind what Councillor Garnett suggested, is that, you know, he asked Mr. Newcomb if that would happen. I'm just suggesting we put that within the motion, that it's not, that we can give direction to that happen, and it's defined in the motion, not sort of maybe floating out there.
Okay, Councillor O'Keefe has the floor.
So when you say,
Your
when
microphone.
you say actual community engagement options, so is your expectation then that staff,
I'm
will-
sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, I'm gonna object. I appreciate
Okay.
your questions and seeking
Okay.
further clarification. But I think it was, and this is a comment, but it's a comment based on on what's transpired. And that is, Mr. Newcomb in his presentation indicated that sections of the zoning bylaw would be brought forward to council, and it would be at council's direction how that proceeded. This is how we've proceeded, you know, I'm now referring to the previous term, but how council proceeds. Things are brought forward. We have in previous, whether it's Climate Action Plan, Act of Transportation, we've given development proposals, we've given direction that it will go to community engagement, or that it will go to a future meeting for further discussion. So I don't know, you seem to be seeking additional clarity that I don't think is going to come in an answer, because it's part of the process. It will come forward to council, and council will make a determination. When that first section, whatever it is, comes to council, council will make a determination on community engagement. You have the floor.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's what I understand was staff's recommendation. I completely understand that. So all I was trying to figure out is, if we're all happy with that approach, what is the purpose of the amendment? What will happen that's different?
Okay, I think you've heard from Councillor Duck, and I've
Okay.
provided some additional information. I mean, you can seek an amendment to the motion if you're not supportive of it.
I was just seeking clarity. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll support the motion that's before us. I think we all want to see that sort of interaction and feedback from the community, and it just gives council the I guess specific discretion to be able to do that. So I'm comfortable with it. My question on the motion that's before us, and it's more through the staff, if I may, is just with respect to the report referring referrals to the Advisory Planning Commission and the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. under selected key topics, so where appropriate. That's not within the motion itself. Is that the intent of staff to move forward on that basis, or would they like to see an amendment to the motion to include Sandwich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. I don't think it's necessary. As other councillors have commented, staff will be bringing forward these sections, and each section will include some recommendations on whether or not we think it's helpful to refer it out to a committee. Council can certainly make their own determination on that. And I would just add as well that I think maybe some of the vagueness in the motion is simply arising out of staff's desire not to presuppose what council wants to do with any of these sections, and leave it open for you to make your decision on what level of engagement you'd like to do. And there's certainly no intention on staff in trying to avoid community engagement. We just didn't want to presuppose council's determination on what to do in the future.
Thank you. I'll support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Novick? Sorry, Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, through you, just not really a question. Mr. Newcomb did answer the question in such a way that I could support the motion as originally presented. That was, you're getting at what I was asking, but he answered it for me. Basically, we have the purview to direct any kind of community engagement. And Councillor Rintoul jumped the gun on me. I was only because SPAC had been mentioned in the document. I thought if we were mentioning APC, I would have preferred it to have been in the recommendation. But given, again, what Mr. Newcomb has said, I think it's comfortable with. I mean, it's not that I won't support what you've said, but I was really comfortable with what was presented. I think it's a reasonable, positive approach, and given the answer I got tonight, I'm more than confident with it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I appreciate the revised motion in principle, when I read the proposed approach in detail, I don't see that we're bringing anything new to the table. The proposed approach that Mr. Newcomb has brought to council contains all of this information, including a very comprehensive public engagement process as per council direction. The only thing that, and now if I understand the motion correctly, that at each stage, which I think is in section 5 of the proposed approach, where they talk about drafts of significant sections being presented to council, if Councillor Duck is suggesting that there be a public engagement at each of those stages, then I would oppose it, because I think it's adding complexity to an already complex process. And I'm not sure that having public engagements at certain steps along the way is really a good idea, considering that council may modify those things of its own accord during the process, and at the end we're going to go to a major comprehensive public engagement process anyway. So, if the amendment was to bring in something that isn't already there, or was going to add a critical step in the process that is missing, I would be more likely to support it. But I think it just adds the potential for having multiple public engagement processes that are not needed when there is already one foreseen at the end of the process. I'm not sure where to go on this, but I have difficulty supporting it as it's presented.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. If I may insert a comment, and it was one of the reasons I asked to hear the change to the resolution, is the end of the wording is at council discretion. It was going to be at council discretion whether we put it in the motion or not, and it will remain at council discretion. So the interpretation of the additional wording is not that it is going to automatically happen at every stage. The reports will come with recommendations from staff, and we'll proceed as we did with all of the other plans that we've done over the last several years. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It does, but then I don't see the need for the extra language.
Okay, well, again, if you're not supportive of it, you could seek to move a motion to amend. I appreciate the comment, but does it mean you won't support it or you will? I don't know. You're motivating, and I'm just providing options to colleagues.
Point of privilege, I'd like to move to end debate and call the question.
I'm just going to leave it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Mr. Humble, and then I will deal with the point of.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. As I said, I think that the additional wording maybe infers the possibility of higher levels of engagement. And I've indicated concern with respect to time frame for completion. So my only respectfully suggested change might be to either remove time frame for completion, or add potential time frame for completion as part of the wording, because I don't want to create an unrealistic expectation regarding higher levels of engagement that is, again, at council's discretion, but that will impact the time frame, as I said.
I think, if I might comment for a moment. So if the original staff motion was what was put forward, I think within that, given that each section comes back to council and it's at council's discretion how it moves forward, there was the potential that the timeline would be exceeded through that process. And what I'm trying to focus on is the wording that was already is already understood to be in the motion, that this process will be at council's discretion when and each time it comes forward to council. And Councillor Duck happened to add the word discretion at the end of his amendment. So I appreciate what Mr. Humble is saying, and if we could have a motion to amend. I'm not sure, Mr. Humble, where exactly the wording might suggest to be changed.
To clarify, I've moved to close end discussion and call the question if there's a seconder.
Okay.
Second.
Well, sorry, I'm going to postpone your point of privilege, because staff have raised a matter that I think council should
Which I
consider.
think you just addressed.
Pardon me?
Which I think you just addressed in your comments. That likelihood was there regardless.
I understand that, but if there is other discussion based on what Mr. Humble has said, I think we should deal with that.
Point of order, the question is being called and you have to call the question and see if the.
Now, I have to take a vote.
Right,
to do
that's what I
that.
say, you have to see if there's a willingness to go forward.
Okay, so I've made a ruling, and so the chair can be challenged in his ruling. If you wish to challenge the chair, then I will proceed.
I challenge the chair.
Okay, so now I'll have to call a vote, and if the challenge of the chair is sustained. So there's been a vote to challenge the chair. So if a majority of council agrees with the challenge of the chair, then we will go to a vote on whether to call the question. If the vote fails to challenge the chair, then we will allow council members to ask questions based on the point that Mr. Humble rose. So I will call and I don't vote in a challenge of the chair. So I'll call the question, do you support the challenge of the chair? Opposed? Sorry, so we only have 2 opposed, Councillor Novick, so it carries. The chair has been challenged, so I will now take a vote. Who is those in favor of calling the question? The motion carries, and so I will call the question on the motion as it was put on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Novick and Councillor O'Keefe are opposed. The motion carries. Sorry, and Councillor Garnett is opposed. So the motion carries 4-3. Thank you. We'll now move to item 13E, which is award of tender for 2023-008 medium duty truck.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, could we consider a recess for 5
I will
minutes?
call a recess for 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we'll resume our meeting after a 5-minute recess. And we are now on item 13E, which is award of tender for a medium-duty truck with flat deck and snow removal accessories. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is replacing a similar style flat deck vehicle that's up for replacement cycle. What we did do a few years ago is we had to retire one of our salt spreader units off of a larger truck that was a steel, and we haven't replaced that in the budget. We're taking an opportunity to add that accessory to a vehicle here of a medium duty style. So we're going up one size in truck with a 4x4 option on it. So it'll have a front end articulating plow, aluminum flat deck frame, and salter sander spreader on the back of the unit. The extra traction with the 4-wheel drive will let us handle some of the hills and some of the areas that we're at. We've also found a trend over the last couple of years with our watering route, our non-irrigated boulevard trees, is the water tank that we have is quite heavy, and the existing truck that we had it on would not handle a full payload. So now with this vehicle, we'll be able to fill the tank up completely, go around and do our water route. The dynamics of a 4-wheel drive, again for winter conditions, higher accumulations of snow where we need more traction to push larger volumes. The 2 shopping days before Christmas this year, where we had about 12 inches of snow on the ground, was a classic example of those tight corners where you just don't get the thrust with a 2-wheel drive truck to move that snow out. To remove it is potential for it. Again, we've started doing a lot of planting in the Ray Creek, Peter Grant Park area. Certainly in drought time, we need to get water out to those areas as well. This truck will allow us to get through some of that more rugged terrain. Potential for emergency work as well if there happens to be a problem in some of those areas, possibly down on the waterfront, other areas like that. So it'll be a little bit more dynamic as a utilitarian type of vehicle, but it'll also certainly complement the snow fleet moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Otherwise, we could proceed with the motion. Councillor Rintoul.
I'll move the contract number 2023-008 for the supply of one new 2023 model medium-duty 4x4 cab and chassis truck equipped with flat deck and snow removal accessories to be awarded to Falcon Equipment at a net cost of $138,039.64.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you again. So we're now moving on to section 14, correspondence. The CRD Regional Growth Strategy Indicator Report, a letter from the CRD dated March the 14th. Myself and a colleague on the CRD board passed a motion to have this report forwarded to all of the municipal governments. And this year and in the future, it's a report that's updated on an annual basis. I didn't want to particularly highlight aspects of the report. I felt it was important that this report come before our councils and other councils in the region, because while the CRD does this report, the CRD as a body, as an entity in itself, and the services it provides, doesn't impact all of those indicators on its own. It is really an indicator report of all of the local governments working together in our region, and I think that comes out in the report and certainly in some of the indicators. And I thought it was helpful information to share with council and for those who might be interested as members of the public who live locally to have a look at that report. So again, I don't have further comments, but I'll turn to a motion to receive for information, and would certainly take any questions from colleagues.
So moved.
A second.
Second, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. And next we'll turn to section 15, correspondence for information.
Moved, received for information. Sorry.
Second.
And so we have it moved and seconded for receipt for information. All in favor? And that motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And then we're turning to notices of motion, and I'm going to, under 16A, amendment to the strategic plan 2023 to 2026. This was a notice of motion presented by myself at a previous council meeting on March the 13th. I just wanted to turn to to staff, perhaps Ms. Nelson. Do I need to read this motion again this evening, or can I? It's on the floor under notices of motion.
I would definitely repeat the bottom part of it.
Okay.
And whereas, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is that the housing priority and actions wording for 2A in the 2023 to 2026 strategic plan be amended as follows. Quote, through review of the zoning bylaw and other initiatives, create conditions to increase the number and types of housing, including different levels of affordability. And so that motion is on the floor through this notice of motion process. The whereas that I provided, clauses that I provided earlier, make reference to the strategic plan that the last council had during the last term, which made specific references to affordable housing. And during the strategic plan process, deliberations that council had with staff and then on its own this year, we made reference as well. But the word affordability, while it can be connotated that it's within the wording, it wasn't stated explicitly. And based on the public feedback we had, I felt it was important that we did identify it specifically. So it's a relatively small amendment in terms of adding the words including different levels of affordability, which could have been understood under the previous wording, but I think that brings greater clarity to the intention of our council. I will turn to other discussion. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. For me, I'm not sure whether it brings additional clarity or not. So what we're adding in is that term, including different levels of affordability. And to me, when I see that, that means basically everything. So that could mean more condos, high-priced for well-off retirees. That's a different level of affordability. So for me, it doesn't provide any further clarity or direction, strategic direction in terms of what we wanted to do. If we were going to do things, to provide clarity, I'd be looking to include things like promote and protect rental housing, or encourage the development of secondary suites, or provide adequate and appropriate accessible housing, or monitor and enforce short-term rentals, or there's a number of other things that we might be able to do. So for me, when I look at that, different levels of affordability, it sounds like it's pretty well everything. And so for me, it doesn't give that level of clarity.
Okay, if I could respond with two comments. One is that the words affordability were included in the strategic plan for the last term, and I think there was an understanding from council and from staff that affordability does mean different things when you're talking about housing. And we're in the benefit, where we have the benefit, that our council, our community has the benefit of having a new official community plan. We've heard earlier this evening in terms of the approach that's going to be taken with regards to rezoning. And specifically in Mr. Newcomb's presentation, he talked about housing policies that can come forward to council with regards to some of the unique aspects of housing that you've indicated. So those would be amendments, further amendments, and giving further direction. But I think there's an understanding that, particularly with having a new OCP in place and with us going through the review of the zoning bylaw, that the council will be looking at new policies in some or several of the areas that you've addressed. So my first comment is that affordability was there, and I think there was a general understanding that it does mean different things in different situations. So I'll leave my comment there, actually. Councillor O'Toole, did you?
No, it was around process, and it wasn't clear to me if you needed a seconder, and I don't think we have one right now.
No, on notice of motion, the motion that is under notice of motion is on the floor by coming to that on the agenda. It doesn't have to be moved and seconded. I'll turn to Ms. Nelson.
That's not indicated in our procedure bylaw.
So you would like a seconder? That's correct. Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. So it's on the floor formally now, and we can proceed with further discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None are opposed? Thank you. And so we're not going to proceed going in camera after tonight's meeting, so I would look for a motion to seek a mover for adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Thank